99% of the vice presidents have been men. 98%, 98% of Congress are men. As a matter of fact, of the 15,000 congressmen that have ever gone through Washington, only 300 of them have been women. 90% of the CEOs of the largest companies are men. 98% of the state legislators are men. 98% of the mayors in the country are men. And she never finished. She didn't say, it was obvious. If they ever got together and decided the same thing they're deciding now in Georgia about reversing some of the voting laws, if men got together and decided to do that against women, they could.
So it was an interesting discussion because she's including women as a minority, even though there is a majority numerically of women in the population.
She's including women as vulnerable.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations. Are your rights really secure? Today's episode is 98%. Enjoy, and please share. So you like this. Robin DiAngelo was the keynote speaker at the AAVMC meeting.
I don't know Robin.
You read White Fragility.
I read the first couple of chapters.
Okay, well, yes. She's the one who wrote that book.
Okay, cool.
She was excellent. Let me ask you a few questions. Other than your nanny, when was the first time a Black person crossed your orbit as an integral part of your life?
Okay, so we're taking out the nannies who were invested in our family starting probably when I was 4.
Right.
So from 0 to 4, almost impossible to remember anything going that far back.
Of course.
Getting into kindergarten and or nursery school, I don't recall any Black kids in either nursery school or kindergarten. And in subsequent years through elementary school, very few. Summer camp, very few. Probably middle school or what we call junior high was when there were first some Black kids that were integrated into the group of kids that were there.
Did you know any of them?
Yeah, I did. In fact, if I were to show you a picture from my bar mitzvah, you would see her attending my bar mitzvah at the age of 13. And she lived down the street from me, but of course, and maybe the but of course is the wrong connector, but she was the daughter of one of the nannies on the block.
And they lived in the neighborhood.
They lived in the house where they were providing care.
Oh, they lived in the house that they were providing care. It wasn't their house.
Right. No.
How integrated was your neighborhood other than the nannies?
How integrated was our neighborhood other than the nannies? I can give you a sarcastic answer, but I would just say the answer is not at all.
Okay. I'm not sure that counts.
Okay. I can't think of any teachers that I had in elementary school. I can't think of any teachers that I had in junior high. I think all of the gym teachers, all of the educational teachers, outside of, and I'm sorry, but it's going to sound rough, but outside of the janitorial staff, I don't believe we had any Blacks on faculty through high school. I know there had to be one or two, but you're now making me think, and I can't recall any off the top of my head.
No, as a matter of fact, when you say there must have been one or two, you're probably completely wrong.
Well, I can go grab my high school yearbook and check, but
Yeah, I know you probably could, and I would bet $100 that you wouldn't find anybody black in your high school yearbook other than the janitorial service in the book, because you have to remember when we grew up, black teachers had to overcome an overt hurdle of segregation, an overt hurdle of qualifications based on their color.
you're challenging me. So at some point in time after we get off this call, my yearbook is just across the hall in the bookshelves. So I will be checking that, and I will take a picture of it one way or the other and let you know whether I owe you 100 or you owe me 100.
Okay, that sounds great, because as progressive as the North considered itself, there were a lot of subliminal, subversive obstacles that blacks had to overcome. I'd like to know when the first time Harvard or Notre Dame hired a black person as a member of their faculty. In the South, it was absolutely a taboo. Black teachers taught in black schools. The reason I asked the question is because D'Angelo made the comment that 75% of the white population go through life without having to relate or interact with the black population. And her whole lecture, she started out by saying, I'm talking to the white people in the audience. And I'm assuming that that's the predominant culture in the audience, because usually it is. And she didn't know about veterinary medicine and its peculiarity with diversity or anything else. She just said, statistics say that, even though I can't see you, most of you are white, and you're the ones I'm talking to. And her whole point was, everything that we do in America is compared to the norm, and the norm is determined by the dominant culture. And one of the best analogies she made is that there are two excellent movie producers, Spike Lee and Mike Lee. Now, she mentioned the movies that Mike Lee produced, but my phone rang, so I missed that part. But anyway, she said, when people describe Mike Lee, he's just an excellent storyteller, and he's good at telling stories about everything. When you talk about Spike Lee makes black movies. And so that secularizes him. That puts him in a minor category. It immediately implies he's not as good as Mike Lee, because he only talks about the black story.
Which is interesting, because I've never heard of Mike Lee.
I know, I understand, but you do understand the comparison.
Yeah, well, I then started thinking of Stan Lee, who wrote the Marvel comic books and did those Marvel movies.
Right.
And then Bruce Lee.
But the point was that when you talk about African-American professionals, you make it a point to say they're African-American. When you talk about white professionals, you don't mention their race.
Right.
Because they set the bar.
Yeah.
They are the norm.
How segregated or how integrated was your high school?
Initially, very. By the time I got to high school, because while I was in junior high, Jackson was forced to integrate. That same high school is 99% black now.
So was it 50% when you were there?
Close. It was about 40% black.
And Jackson, though, was
30% of Jackson was black.
So the high school was a pretty good representation of the population of the city.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, initially. It took 3 or 4 years for a white flight to change that.
What was the distribution of the teaching faculty at your high school?
Oh, they were all white.
Interesting.
Initially.
Okay. What would you say they are now?
I would say they're 80-20, black, white.
Yeah, and your mom still lives there.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, we digressed off of the norm and the tendency to, I don't want to say the term stereotype, but the tendency to cubbyhole people once you identify their race as he's a black producer, not like he's a white producer. You don't say that Steven Spielberg, oh yeah, he's the Jewish producer.
Right. Because he's white. The other point she made was, on the spectrum of racism, America is simply anti-black. And she even challenged the people of color in the audience and said, I don't know what color you are, but it's not as bad for you as it is for Black people. Everything is targeted against Black people. Now, if you're brown, you suffer because you're not white too, but not as much as Black people. It's just, that's the target. Everything is designed against Black people. The system is rigged. We've had this discussion before, the brown paper bag.
Yep.
She essentially said that's a systematic approach. There's a reason why you have those kind of practices, because everything is about being anti-Black.
Instead of building a physical wall like we're trying to build at the border, we're building a plethora of other types of walls and barriers of access, paper bags, count the marbles, whatever the case may be, to have equal access and equal rights.
Right.
So the norm, and it is interesting when you think about it, because a lot of HR 1, which I guess is the bill that was just passed at the House level, it's an effort to address those, one component of it from the election standpoint, to take out those barriers.
Yeah. Well, right now, HR 1 is really to combat all of the individual state efforts
Right.
to reverse many of the advances we've made to make voting easier. It bothers me to think that anyone who truly believes that they live in a democratic society would do anything to reduce the expression of that democracy. And it bothers me further when I realize that they're blatant about only limiting a certain voice, and that voice is based on the color of my skin. It bothers me even more, and I just realized that I ranked this third, but that's because of the personal insult that I just described. But it bothers me even more that they do this in order to empower the minority. And the minority is not based on the color of the skin, it's based on ideology. And it bothers me further that minority is in power. And what they're really doing is protecting their power. They don't give a damn about their democracy. They don't give a damn about the ideals. If I were one of them, then the ideals that I believe in is bullshit. It's only about being at the table, only about being in control. It's only about power.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be reality, but I can't sleep at night if I'm going to give up my ideals. And I would rather fight for my ideals than to become one of them.
How do we explain the Black Republican representatives and senators who are, I mean, is it strictly a political remain in office type thing that they support gerrymandering and support the efforts to prevent people from voting? I mean, what's the explanation, or is there an explanation for that?
Well, I have a counter question: is why should I have to? And the reason I say that is that if we believe a two-party system or a three-party system is critical for debate and a full fleshing out of the issues, then why should it matter which party anybody chooses other than ideology?
Right.
Right? One of the reasons I'm an independent is because of that very assumption. The moment I declare I'm a Democrat, that I support everything that the Democratic Party puts in its platform. And I abhor being the tactics that are used in political discussion when they say, you Democrat. The COVID bill is a duplicate of the bill that they passed last March under Trump, almost. Except for the $15 wage and that they finally dropped out, and except for the amounts for some of the parts of the bill, 90% of the COVID bill is just a recharging of the first one. And all of a sudden, because Democrats are in power, it's a Democratic wish list. I hate the misrepresentation that occurs on a party basis. To get back to your question, and I'm sorry that I displaced the question because it's a legitimate one. I just had to recognize that to even ask the question betrays the right to choose.
Right.
Right. But without identifying any particular Black Republican, there are a myriad of reasons why there are some Black Republicans. Some of them are Tea Partiers to some degree. I'm a fiscal conservative myself, but that doesn't mean I don't know when to spend money for the good of society. And so my budgetary conservatism tells me that this $1.9 trillion is going to cause some inflationary problems down the road, and that we're going to have to deal with that. But I'd rather deal with that than to deal with prolonged, sustained, and possibly irreversible unemployment. This is the time to step up and to make sure that even the margins are fine, meaning the upper levels of society are okay by the time we get through this crisis. And so this is not the time to be pulling back and to say it needs to be more targeted, especially when the last bill lost billions of dollars to crooks. How targeted was that?
I guess the nature of my question came more about, have we created political parties with representatives who no longer actually take the opportunity to choose? And this polarization is fairly well reflected in the sense that there's almost no crossing of the aisle from a party line standpoint on anything.
Well, that's a problem of politics now.
Right. And the question was more of a politically based question.
Yeah. That's not an individual, but you asked about the individual. And yes, the problem there is that, and honestly, I don't understand why anybody would think that a Black Republican would be any more courageous than a Johnson. And if your money is coming from the Republican Party, you're not going to put that at risk unless you're going to change your party.
Right. So let me throw a term out there that was commonly used, because I know it's going to get your hackles up.
like as if I haven't already been upset today.
Uncle Tom.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I mean, are these Republican senators and representatives basically, and I don't know if I can call it Uncle Tomming, but whatever that, would they fit into that servile type population? I mean, are they really making independent, or are they just doing what everybody tells them to do? Did I get your heart rate up on that one?
No, you didn't.
Okay.
No, you didn't. And you didn't, because I have been a borderline Uncle Tom, or at least accused. That's the problem with labels.
Yes.
Right? Let's first define Uncle Tomism.
Okay.
If you will. Uncle Tomism, as you said, is the servile, slavish behavior that begs for cordial treatment by the dominant society.
Right.
Right? I'll do whatever you want as long as you don't whip me, bastard. I'll do whatever you want as long as I can get a decent meal today, master. I'll do whatever you want, as long as you leave me alone, master. That's Uncle Tomism.
Hmm. So let's get back to Robin DiAngelo, because politics is exhausting me. So Robin was talking about the norm, and what was her? I don't know how long she spoke for, but was there a take-home message?
Well, no, she started out just like we did with our conversations that said, I have no answers,
Right.
and she essentially, I thought of you a lot while she was talking, because she said, I just need you to understand that you've got a lot of work to do. This is a journey. And we say that all the time, right?
Right.
You and I both are learning from each other. Now, what she didn't say is what she doesn't know is that the journey's on both sides. But she definitely put the responsibility squarely on white society. And she had a picture of this meeting of the Freedom Caucus when they were discussing their position on, I think, Obamacare or something. But anyway, she had this picture of this meeting of the Freedom Caucus, and it was full of white men. I mean, it was almost scary. The only way I could have been more intimidated would have been if they had been wearing white coats and a hood. And I didn't recognize hardly any of them, but they were all congressmen. But it was full of, there wasn't a woman or a black person or brown person in the group. And yet they were discussing an issue that was going to affect my life. And they were arguing about something? What could they have been arguing about that mattered to me?
Nope. It hasn't changed from 1860, 1830, 1770. The people who are making decisions are not reflecting the diversity of the demographics of the people for whom they are making decisions.
They're not, and they don't care. And they know nothing about their lives, so they aren't informed.
Right.
The analogy she made, and it's because she's a woman, but she started out by saying that, everybody has implicit bias. Everybody. That's not what I'm talking about. She said, we all compare ourselves to the official definition of racist. The definition of racist says that you consciously mistreat people because of their skin color. And then she said, by this definition, nobody is a racist because nobody's going to admit they consciously did anything.
There's a point there.
And so she says, so everybody said, well, that's not me. I didn't mean to cause any harm. And so she doesn't talk about racist. She talks about systemic racism. And she said, but in order for you to understand what I mean, you got to, let me talk about the suffrage movement. And she says, because it's the best example I know. And she talks about how women earned the right to vote in various countries. And she puts up a slide where it shows which year the women earned the right to vote. And in America, it was 1920. In Great Britain, it was 1915. And in Australia, it was 1936. And in Thailand, it was this. And, she has had all these nations with. So this is a systemic. This is when the dominant culture, men, regardless of the color, men, I mean, she had African nations up there too. Men decided to grant the right to vote to the other half of society. And then she said, did you ever wonder if they could take it back? I've heard some women say, men didn't give us anything. We took the right to vote. We fought. No, they gave up fighting. And what bothers me is after women got the right to vote, then they said, well, black women can't vote either, still can't vote. And white women walked away from that. White women have benefited from more than black women ever have. And yet they're castigated because they're double minorities. And when a black woman gets a job, an important CEO job or something, everybody said, well, yeah, she got it because she's black and a woman. So she counts double, and that diminishes the qualifications and the ability of that individual. But anyway, she never did say, your right is still fragile. What she said was, well, let's see if they could take it away. And so she said, 100% of the presidents of the United States have been men. 99% of the vice presidents have been men. 98% of Congress are men. As a matter of fact, of the 15,000 congressmen that have ever gone through Washington, only 300 of them have been women. 90% of the CEOs of the largest companies are men. 98% of the state legislators are men. 98% of the mayors in the country are men. And she never finished. She didn't say, it was obvious. If they ever got together and decided the same thing they're deciding now in Georgia about reversing some of the voting laws, if men got together and decided to do that against women, they could.
So it was an interesting discussion because she's including women as a minority, even though there is a majority numerically of women in the population.
She's including women as vulnerable.
Okay.
Don't use the word minority.
Right. But I think there was this concept of being a double minority.
I introduced that. She did.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, they only have 3/5 of the vote.
If they don't understand their vulnerability, if they don't understand the right to vote, but the lack of exercising that right makes them vulnerable to the dominant culture, because the dominant culture isn't about numbers.
Right.
We just said that the minority is controlling government, and now they're trying to keep their power.
Now, Robin DiAngelo has got to be a white woman.
Yes, she is.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And she was very good about saying, look, I'm not saying that white is bad. This isn't about good or bad. And she was saying, when 75% of your white population is insulated in whiteness, you just confirmed when I asked you your question, you went to how many black teachers you had without my even asking.
Yeah.
Right? And her point was, most of us have never had a black instructor. I was dumbfounded by that because until integration, all I had was black instructors. And then when I got integrated, I saw that I actually got out of high school before it shifted back.
So I'm trying to think back to Cornell undergrad. Okay, I spent 3 years on campus at Cornell, 1 year in Ireland, and neither of the two instructors I had in Ireland were black. Not that. Okay. But at Cornell, in the biological sciences, animal sciences, I can't think of any black instructors either. Okay, now I moved to Champaign, Illinois for a graduate program. And one of the master students who was in my master's program with me, she was black. I think she was from Chicago. There were three of us in the MS program, a woman from Alabama, myself, and a black woman. And so we all were working together fairly closely. And but I'm trying to think of any faculty that were in the graduate program or even in the veterinary school that were black, and I can't think of any either.
When I got my PhD at North Carolina State, for the first time now, I realized that part of the difficulty of getting my PhD had nothing to do with the PhD program. It had to do with my learning the culture. I didn't understand it then. And my major professor was very caring. I was I was her first student, first graduate student. She had two graduate students. She got two graduate students for the first time, and I was one of them. The other was white. And my success was intricately integrated in with hers. So she cared that I was successful just from a professional basis. And she learned to care about me. But she was a hard ass, a little selfish, professionally driven. I shouldn't say self. She was professionally driven, which was fine. But now that I think about some of the things that I had to learn, it was cultural. And yet there were one or two Black faculty at North Carolina State at the time, but they didn't teach me anything. Now, my research and my area wasn't in their area. And we avoided each other like the plague. So it didn't look like we were going to start a riot.
Get three of you together in one room. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, I'm serious. That was an unstated agreement. We were going to blend in.
Yeah, that's easy.
And now I understand. And now I know that I made it. And now I understand that some of those admonitions I was getting from my professor or from some other professor was cultural. It wasn't about the paper I wrote or the experience or my interpretation of the data. That was part of it. But there was also a lesson in culture that made it difficult. And you have to understand, I got my PhD after I taught for 10 years. And then I went back to school full time to get a PhD. So there was already an ego challenge. And I'm at North Carolina State with faculty that used to be my comrades.
Yes.
Used to be my colleagues.
You had to go from being on a first name basis back to being a doctorate basis.
Yeah.
I still hard to wrap my arms around the fact that we've been dealing with this for 400 years, and there is no. I guess it's a marathon and not a sprint.
No, what you have a problem wrapping your arms around is that people can be that diabolical.
True.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You know, until you understand that room of white men, maybe individually they are the epitome of Christianity, but those religious ideals pale when it comes to politics.
I look for the best in people, and I guess it's hard for me to sometimes wrap my arms around the worst of people.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. And that's why this is such a dangerous time. If people don't understand that what's going on in Arizona and Georgia and Wisconsin and Minnesota state legislators is but a step from threatening them. You know, nobody who lives in the suburbs thinks their polls are going to close.
Yeah, what it is I didn't like it. Let's rewind it and do it again. And let's rewind it so it can't come out anyway, but with the way I want it to come out.
Again, I'm protecting the minority power.
Yeah.
See, what's happened is a small segment of our society, they used to be the predominant society, but they don't want to give up any power now. They suddenly realize that we are about to become a pluralistic society.
Right. And we're trying to prevent that from occurring politically based upon the efforts
we recognize that we can't prevent it from occurring, so we need to change the rules.
Yeah.
A vibrant democracy is ruled by the majority, but the rights of the minority are protected. That is the challenge for a vibrant democracy. And now some people who have been in the dominant culture are afraid of how they treated the minority in the past. And they understand what could happen because they've done it.
So what's the future going to look like? That's the crystal ball, isn't it?
I actually think the future is going to come out okay because because they've done a good job of indoctrinating the plurality in the ideals of a democracy. And some of us ain't going back. And some of us will fight just as hard and just as dirty as those who are trying to reverse time, who are trying to reverse our advances. The danger is you can't wrestle with a pig and not get dirty.
The do-over.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're not talking just a do-over from November of 2020. We're talking a do-over to 1965, 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment to the, no, excuse me, 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment was 1865.
Well, I think the Civil War would be just as good too.
Yeah, well, that's the real do-over, isn't it?
You know, in the South, they have a phrase that the North may have won the war, but we're going to win the peace.
Yep. Well, you could use that line too, but it's just, and again, I guess you could be having this conversation with somebody else, and they might not be bothered by what's going on. I guess maybe it was just the way I was raised, and whatever my white privilege brought did not mean that other people were treated with less respect, and everybody was, so I don't know. It just seems to, it bothers me.
Yeah, I understand, but the difference is, and this is how we hide. The difference is individual expectations versus individual recognition of systemic practices.
Right.
And what bothers you, and what should bother you, is the size and the insidiousness and the magnitude and power of that system. But it's going to take an amalgamation, a integration of individuals to change that system. And that is an overwhelming concept, but that is what democracy is. And it should be that difficult so that you can't just change things. But the problem is once it's set, it's kind of like no government program ever dies. Once it's set, you must either have a significant amount of people, and unfortunately it has to be a significant majority that's suffering from the practice, or a significant majority that says, aha, I see a danger coming.
You know what's interesting is you could even go back further and look at the efforts to control the census because of the impact that has. I mean, that's just another effort on the part of the minority party to control the story.
Well, like you said, the 3/5 of a person, that was nothing but a recognition of the possibility that slaves might get counted and get in some way that might empower the South.
Right. I'm not sure where I thought where our conversation was going to go today, but I didn't think it was going in this direction. When you started talking about white fragility and Mike Lee and Spike Lee, it was like, I thought we were going normally, but we went far from normally to politically.
Yes, we did. But for anybody to think that social justice does not involve politics, they're naive.
Well, social justice is all about politics. And it's the education to prison pipeline, and it is the voting aspects of things. And it's all of the different efforts to maintain the world the way it was, instead of acknowledging a world that has been changing for decades and centuries.
Yep.
So.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.